Welcome to Forging the Future, Decarbonizing the Steel Industry, a Hatch podcast series. I'm your host, Sakshi Sachdeva, and invite you to join us on a journey through the challenges and innovations in iron and steel production. Discover how Hatch's century of expertise is shaping a sustainable future for the steel industry. Stay tuned as experts from Hatch share their insights on technology, market dynamics, and the path to decarbonization. Welcome back to Forging the Future, Decarbonizing the Steel Industry, a podcast where we talk about the latest in sustainability and innovation in the iron and steel. On today's podcast, I have two Hatch specialists, Randy McMeekin, Global Managing Director of Engineering at Hatch, and Gessa, Ferrous Metallurgy Specialist at Hatch. And today we'll be diving deep into navigating the complexities that the steel producers hold ahead of them. I mean, I'd like to start the conversation today. We know, the iron and steel industry is centuries old, constantly evolving and built upon trillions of dollars worth of assets today. My question to you is, what makes it different this time with the green steel projects?
Iron and steel is a massive and mature industry, as you pointed out. It is steadily evolving for centuries, building on new technology, new processes, new materials to become what it is today, which is one of the largest, most complex industries, certainly in the value chain perspective, in our society. But I think what's different this time around with the green steel is that the traditional evolution of technologies not quick enough, responsive enough in the face of the very urgent need to respond to the global climate change crisis, right? We need more of a revolutionary transformation to kick up a notch and decarbonize industry. And now again, the steel industry is not new to the introduction of new technologies and improve the process in decarbonization as well. We've seen lots of projects, things like electrification, process reuse, gas reuse, waste heat recovery, all being introduced. But I think to make significant GHG emission reductions that can meaningfully tip the scale of climate change, we do need to focus on those massive green steel mega projects that can really make a big impact, right? So again, the reason for that, of course, iron making, which is the core of the iron and steel value chain, is the most emission intensive part of it, but it's also the most technology intensive, capital intensive, and energy intensive part of the value chain. And it's always depended on carbon since the dawn of human civilization, right? So now we need, as you said, to carve out and replace the core of the iron and steel value chain with billions and hundreds of $billion of assets in a relatively short time frame with alternative and novel technologies. So I think that is probably the biggest challenge the iron and steel industry faces in decarbonization.
Yeah, Randy, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, look, I think, as I said it well, this is incredibly disruptive to a mature industry. The headwinds are significant, and I think you said it well. It's a significant investment that has to be made quickly, and so everyone has to come to bear to bring the best practices so that we can overcome the headwinds of high capital cost, and that's something that we're really thinking hard about at Hatch.
So maybe let's dive into capital investments required for these mega projects. What are perhaps some of the pain points or cost challenges with these new projects?
Yeah, I think let's zoom in a bit on North America and Europe in particular. Now, the North American and European steel industry have a lot of experience in executing fairly large projects, maybe several $100 million worth of projects in the past, new technology, new processes. But most of the proposed green steel transformation projects we've seen to date are in the several billion, $1 to $5 billion scale. And they're usually quite heavily integrated, right? You have hydrogen production, iron making, steel making, sometimes carbon capture, all integrated in the same site. Now, this is something that North American European steel industry hasn't executed in probably close to a decade, right? If you look back in the history, the last major integrated steel production facility outside of Asia is in South America, probably almost a decade ago. And the one before that is probably pre-2010. So, even though we see a lot of mini mills, successful projects develop across the United States, they're billion-dollar projects, and they are usually done very well by a successful and experienced owners team with a lot of great track record. But I think these large transformational integrated steel projects, both in terms of expertise and experience, is something of a challenge, especially in North America and Europe. And certainly outside Asia, we haven't seen something to that scale in recent years.
Do you think the industry is prepared for this transition? I'll get your take on that, Randy.
Well, I think Geza said it well. When you look at just the massive scale of the scope of what must be done to cause the transformation, working all the way from green hydrogen production, all the way through to building new facilities, and effectively reshaping the business case entirely, and yet producing, in many cases, the same equivalent number of tons of steel. So the headwinds to our owner are obvious, and that's where the need for capital efficiency comes in. The need to be able to do these projects as efficiently as possible, as quickly as possible, at the lowest cost, with the lowest operating costs at the end of the day. I think that's what's necessary to make this transformation happen.
So, Randy, you've had a phenomenal career at Hatch with decades of experience in project delivery and being involved with some of the biggest projects in the world in the metals space. I'm curious to know, how is Hatch preparing to help the industry and the iron and steel producers for the challenge that they have to face ahead?
Well, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, this challenge is requiring all of Hatch to come together. When you think about the scope and the breadth of what we're talking about, all the way from how do we produce efficient green hydrogen, how do we develop a customized flow sheet with new technologies, how do we deliver the projects as efficiently and cost effectively as possible, how do we engage our communities and make sure that we're building sustainable plants, how do we get environmental permitting. All of those big challenges are in front of our clients. And luckily at Hatch, we have deep expertise in all those spaces, and that's what we're doing. You know, from my perspective, I think one of the most important things is how do we cause capital efficiency in the delivery of the projects. The capital cost, you talked about it, the hurdles that our clients are facing is enormous. And so we have some great ideas about how to build these facilities better, faster, shorter schedules, lower OPEX, lower CAPEX. And we're bringing some of our smart thinking, like digital project delivery, where we're bringing new tools that take integrated data and allow for really efficient engineering, and importantly, driving construction productivity. And all that leads to really fast ramp-ups. And when you have a fast ramp-up and meet the business case, get to nameplate quickly, you can get a good return on investment. And that's the kind of thinking that we're bringing to these projects.
No, thanks for sharing that. Can you perhaps share some of the success stories and some projects you've been involved with?
Well, we're bringing basically our 70 years of history in capital project delivery. You know, in other metal spaces, we've had some tremendous records of startups that happen in weeks as opposed to months. And of course, we have a great track record of bringing projects in on time and on budget. And perhaps most importantly is that we do it safely. And I think we can talk about that a bit more, but and any of these situations where you're doing big capital projects, that's got to be first and foremost in our minds. And again, we're bringing some good thinking about how to cause that.
Let's talk a bit more about some specific initiatives. I mean, we hear about hydrogen-based iron-making facilities come to life in Europe, and these are brand new facilities that we're looking at. And also, on the other hand, we have existing facilities that are redesigning their operation and revamping so they can lower their CO2 emissions in the future. How do perhaps these two differ when it comes to risk and challenges associated with each?
Sure. Takshi, so what you just mentioned is essentially a classic greenfield and a classic brownfield green steel project in that matter. And you're absolutely right. They're very different in terms of the particular risks and challenges they face. So let's start with the greenfield operation, which is essentially the construction of a brand new facility without a lot of constraints and sites and interferences. In our experience, particularly for the steel industry, the biggest destroyers of project value is the inability or delays in reaching nameplate capacity after construction. This is the nature of the iron and steel business, right? We rely on high, consistent throughput to remain profitable. Now, when you compound that with a very high CapEx investment, as Randy pointed out earlier, required for green steel projects, as well as all the technology risk coming with novel alternative processes, and then the natural conclusion is that operational readiness and commissioning is probably the biggest risk factor for green steel projects, which is, how quickly can you ramp up to nameplate capacity and start recovering your capital and investments while also maintaining a safe and reliable operation of the brand new technology you just put in. On the other hand, you have brownfield project, which is again now building an entire steel plant within a fully operational steel plant. So of course the main risk is safety. Now you have your usual risks and safety risk of running a full production steel plant. On top of that, you have the usual construction risks, safety risk of a active construction site. And you're compounding them because they're operating at the same place at the same time and with a lot of complex interferences. So I think that's probably the foremost risk of executing a brownfield transformation. Now there's also the business risk of brownfield transformation because unlike a greenfield project, the brownfield operational sites need to continue smoothly without missing a beat to sustain the cash flow needed for that transformation, right? So the last thing you want to see is all these complex interferences leading to disruptions to your operation, and now you're missing orders. Now you're losing clients. So at the end of the day, you may have a very successfully executed construction, but you've lost your client that you can sell the product to, and that's going to cause permanent and long-term damage to your business long after this wrap-up construction. I think that's probably the biggest risk factor between green and brownfield.
How do you tackle these risks and challenges? And maybe that's a question for you, Randy.
Sure. Well, look, as I said, the greenfield opportunity for a client allows a clean slate of paper to start a design, and that gives us the opportunity to optimize that design as much as we possibly can, because the biggest headwind in the greenfield case is cost, for sure. And so we're really focused helping our clients with that, integrating technologies, coming up with small footprints, being able to construct as quickly as possible, like I spoke of before. The brownfield case, I think, is more interesting and perhaps more important because I believe that the majority of our clients are going to be facing that challenge. We have to eliminate the blast furnaces that are operating around the world now, more than I think we're going to be seeing new plants being built. And so, as Geza said, that's extremely challenging. That's open heart surgery on a patient that has to survive, and they have to keep running a business. And we have a long track record of doing brownfield projects for clients in many industries, and we're bringing some good thinking to that space as well. You know, whenever you're in an operating plant, you have to be thinking about safety, about isolations and tie-ins. You have to be ready for the unexpected because you've got assets that are aged. And so you have to understand the existing condition. You have to be able to replace equipment while the plant is still running. And those kind of things require a lot of thinking. So the brownfield requires a lot of upfront planning and more engineering than you might expect. But the benefit, of course, is significantly lower cost than the greenfield case. And so we're using a lot of smart technologies where we can actually simulate construction. In the computer, in a 3D model environment, we'll actually simulate how we're going to pull a piece of equipment out and put a piece of equipment in the shortest period of time. And we run various scenarios to make sure that that is absolutely optimized. And again, in the safety front, we're using our tools to identify risks, making sure that the workers can work safely. It could be electrical isolation, it could be threats of things falling from above. But all that leads to very detailed planning, advanced work packaging, and we actually simulate that with our constructors before we start that work. And if we do that, we end up with efficient, safe construction at a much lower cost.
What is Hatch's experience both when it comes to greenfield and brownfield?
Well, we have experience in both, and we're lucky with that long 70-year history of doing capital projects, and we can bring the best to bear to every one of those challenges.
No, thanks for diving into that. So we talked about CapEx risks. We've touched upon greenfield versus brownfield projects and the risks associated with them. What are some of the implementation risks when it comes to delivering a project at the size that we're talking about?
I think another potential challenge, especially for the steel industry and green steel projects, is we need to reimagine the way how projects are delivered and implemented. So traditionally, iron and steel industry have always relied on very mature technology, very well-proven flow sheets that changes very little from project to project and client to client. The last major shift in technology and flow sheet for us is mini mill and EAF steelmaking, and the one before that is probably oxygen steel making in the 1960s. And you look at blast furnace, which has essentially unchanged for hundreds of years. Now, the mature pathways and well-proven technology in the iron and steel industry has resulted in our producers getting very used to the traditional turnkey lump sum EPC style delivery. And they have its place in the industry, right? When the technology is mature, when the flow sheet's proven, when the equipment's well-defined, you do want to prefer those technology suppliers that come up with commoditized, mature solutions. But I think now with the advent of green steel projects, we have a lot of different competing pathways, competing technologies, each with different maturity, risks, and optimal use scenario. So there's a lot of planning and thinking ahead of all of that, as well as development, demonstration, and optimization to really get the successful outcome that you're looking for. I think this is where I always look to a comparison with our colleagues in the non-ferrous and ferroalloy industry, right? They've always depended on more customized, tailored solutions for their process for each type of ore body they use. This made them a little bit more nimble and agile in the face of very rapid and large transitions and transformations in industry. I think the good example is that they dealt with something similar as this decarbonization challenge we have, which is a couple of decades ago, the removal of SO2 from the emissions, right? I think the preference of that particular delivery model made them much more responsive, and they end up very successfully eliminated SO2 from emissions, which is something we can draw inspiration from in the ferrous iron and steel industry today when we face with decarbonization.
What's a good approach then to take when it comes to projects like this?
Well, I think the key is de-risking the project is going to take a different path. Because I talked about a client wanting to de-risk with a very mature technology, lump sum turnkey makes perfect sense because everyone knows what they have to do and you end up with the optimal outcome. But we're talking about a bespoke flow sheet, new technologies, very challenging conditions, many stakeholders. And so what we're learning is that what's required is a far more collaborative approach rather than kind of a contractual arrangement, which happens in series. We're now forming teams very early where every stakeholder starts to get involved. We get our energy supplier, hydrogen technology supplier involved. Early contractor involvement is very, very important. Getting the community involved as a stakeholder is very important. And working through all of the challenges together with the owner to de-risk the project is the best outcome. That's what we're finding is working far better than the previous solutions that have been used in the past. So with our clients, we're collaborating, we're forming teams, integrated teams in some cases, in some cases an EPCM model, in which we cause this on behalf of our clients. But it's taking a different approach, and those approaches are proving to be quite effective.
So, Gessa, you touched upon the non-ferrous industry solving the problem of SO2 emissions years ago. Are there perhaps any lessons learned from them that we can apply to the green steel space today?
Certainly, Taksha. I think for me, looking at those examples, the biggest learning I have from them is how much work they do ahead of project execution in terms of planning and early works, right? Everything from definition of their business plan, their concept, the selection of flow sheet, the trade-offs they do, and the amount of customized engineering and process design they do upfront. I mean, it's intense work upfront, but none of the work that you do, early work you do, that does make all the execution work downstream a lot easier. It certainly makes for a much better and more predictable outcome once it goes to execution and further. Right?
Yeah, I really think that's a great analog. The SO2 reduction program that was around 20 years ago is very similar to what we're looking at in decarbonization. You said it well. We're talking about novel, risky technologies that were really expensive and didn't add to the overall production of whatever product we were talking about. So those are big challenges. And like as I said, right, it required a lot of homework, a lot of front-end loading, pilot work, pilot plant testing, and again, a lot of collaboration to come together to solve that problem. And I think we're going to use a lot of those tactics in the green steel space. We're going to bring that learning because it's so similar. And I think those are opportunities for us to continue to bring value and drive these projects ahead.
So we touched upon collaboration and partnerships being key to making a project successful. What makes for a good partner?
That is a very good question, Takshi. I think the right partner or partners to make a green steel project successful will change along the life cycle of that project, right? I think in early phase, you want someone who's technology independent, who can objectively assess all the different options out there, because for sure there's a lot of options out there in terms of flow sheet technology. They can build a solid business case that can allow you to finance the intense CapEx requirement to move the project forward. And I think later on, when it goes to execution, all the way through the commissioning, different partnerships, different partners will all come into play.
And I think you're looking for expertise and experience with this magnitude of a challenge. So I think you're looking for partners that have that quality, and importantly, the commitment to stay with the projects and to bring the best that they have to this immense challenge.
Mm-hmm. That long-standing relationships and really standing with our clients all the way through.
Right. And I think a key part of this equation, of course, is the ability to integrate bespoke technologies into a complex flow sheet. So we have to be able to work together in industries that previously before maybe didn't do that much. So this is where I think there's going to be a change. And I think we're going to start seeing partnerships with technology suppliers, constructors, owner-operators, and the communities. And that's going to be very important in this particular situation.
Let me pile on a bit. I think through our Hatch's 70-year history, we have a lot of great clients and long-term partners. I think one of the great examples is a Canadian iron and steel producer that we've partnered with as one of our first clients when Hatch was conceived. And we've been working through the decades, including development, implementation of new technologies, project execution, delivery, research, development, and all the way through. And I think that partnership is alive and strong and very healthy, and we're committed to supporting them through these transitions with decarbonization as well into the future.
And I think one of the key aspects on that was a consistent focus on the business case and the project. And that united front really brings partnerships to life and leads to great outcomes.
Well, as we're nearing to the end of the podcast here, I'd like to thank the two of you for taking the time today and joining us. For our listeners online, any key messages that you'd like them to walk away with?
Maybe I'll go first. I think the iron and steel industry is at a cusp of a major transformation. And I think with all the headwinds and risks we've talked about today, for me, the biggest message is you got to find the right partner, you got to rethink your approach, and you got to do your homework. Because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You got to start on the right foot, manage your pace so that you can get to the finish line.
Thanks, Gessa.
And look, I'll just add, you said it well. This is a multifaceted, incredibly complex challenge, importantly, that the entire world needs to have done quickly. And so it's going to require everyone to come together with a lot of expertise and collaborative thinking, new ways to do projects, and it's going to be a big, exciting challenge for us.
Thank you for joining us on Forging the Future, Decarbonizing the Steel Industry, where we navigate the complexities of iron and steel. We hope today's episode has provided you with valuable insights into the sustainable transformation of the industry. Remember, the path to decarbonization is a collaborative effort, and every step counts towards a greener future. I am your host, Takshi Sachdeva, and along with the entire team at Hatch, we appreciate your engagement and curiosity.